Welcome, everybody. I'm really so glad to have you join us for this section of Unfinished, Actualizing an Intersectional Anti-Racist Future. My name is Dr. Wendi Williams, and I'm the Dean of the School of Education here at Mills. And I'm joined by my friend, my new friend, Kendra Carr, who's the Chief Program Officer for Girls Leadership, which you'll learn a bit more about this organization, as well as Chris Chatmon, who's the CEO of Kingmakers. We have invited you all to be a part of a conversation that we think will be really engaging. We want you to, as we're in the process of speaking and thinking through various elements of this topic, the topic being racial and gender socialization, how we end the school to prison pipeline. And so both of these folks have been doing some critical work over many years in various contexts and also deeply in community. So we're going to have an opportunity to hear about that. And as we are in conversation with Chris and Kendra, open to the chat, wanting you to contribute your questions and your thoughts, because what we're going to do is integrate it into our conversation and make sure that we feel like we're having a more full, robust engagement with one another. So we've invited both Kendra and Chris to share and introduce themselves and also the work that they do and within the organizations that they are key in leading. Kendra, would you like to go first?
I'm happy to. Yep, okay. That works.
We'll give Chris some time to set up the production.
Okay, perfect. All right. Peace and love, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Wendi. My name is Kendra Carr. And I want to start by saying Sanbonani, y'all. I have a sister from Zimbabwe who, when I went to South Africa to live for 6 months, she taught me a little bit of Zulu. And Sanbonani means I see you and I acknowledge your presence and your divinity. And so Brother Chris, Sister Wendi, and audience members, even though I can't see your face, just I acknowledge your presence. And so Sanbonani. I am because we are. I don't walk alone and would never want to. So first and foremost, I'm a child of the Most High. I'm a temple of the Most High. I'm a daughter, a granddaughter, a sister, auntie, cousin, niece, mentor, teacher. I'm the partner, the wife to Brother Black. That's what we call him, Black Power. Black is beautiful. He goes by that in the community. And we met in this work and we have 3 sons. So I'm the mother of Samuel Nasor, Solomon Mkura, and Samir Imhotep. They are like my joy wrapped up in beautiful brown skin. And so I just want to honor my ancestors. I want to honor my mom and my grandmother in particular because they're the queens that planted the legacy of love and purpose within me. And so like when I show up, I know that they're with me. So I came to this work in education because I wanted to disrupt some practices that harmed me as a student, where I felt like dismissed and invisible in the curriculum. And I unfortunately thought like to be successful that I had to distance myself from being Black. And so I didn't do this consciously. It was like little by little over time until one day I was like, I am so twisted and contorted that I don't even know myself. And so I've had to do a lot of unlearning of white supremacy within me. I'm still doing it, y'all, because it shows up, it's ongoing. And I like come to this work because I want to work for the liberation of Black girls and girls of color while I'm liberating myself. And so I've been in roles in education like teacher, counselor, administrator, and now I'm the Chief Program Officer of Girls Leadership. And our mission is to teach girls to exercise the power of their voice. And so when I say girls, let me first just say that I'm talking about cisgender girls, transgender girls, gender expansive youth. And when I say leadership, we're talking about leadership like in terms of like knowing oneself and knowing like what you feel and what you need and being able to speak to that and advocate for yourself so that you can influence not just yourself, but the community around you so you can be an agent of change. So that's what we mean by leadership. And so we offer girls programming, professional development for teachers, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I just wanted to, for my like creative piece, like I find healing in Black women's writing. And so I just want to read this excerpt from Bell Hooks, who wrote Teaching to Transgress. Well, Bell Hooks wrote a lot of works, but Teaching to Transgress. And I just want to read this short piece because Bell Hooks is explaining that she educates as the practice of freedom, right? And that its learning process comes easiest to those of us who teach, who also believe that there's an aspect of our vocation that's sacred, who believe that our work is not merely to share information, but to share in the intellectual and spiritual growth of our students. To teach in a manner that respects and cares for the souls of our students is essential if we are to provide the necessary conditions where learning can most deeply and intimately begin.
Mm.
And so I wanted to share that piece as an introduction of myself, and thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I want us to follow in Kendra's wonderful example of really bringing our full selves into the space. And so in the chat, if you can let us know who you are and where you are joining us from, what lands you're on. We are in Oakland on Ohlone land. And so we want to acknowledge that. And so if you can also do that with us as well, that would be wonderful. We want to know who's in the room virtually with us. Chris, on to you.
Shay, Kendra, just appreciate your voice, your wisdom, your grace, excellence, your genius. Thank you, Queen, for all of your words. What a beautiful way to enter this space. Dr. Williams, thank you for the opportunity, for your leadership, and for just helping frame this conversation today. Quick intro for me, and then I'm going to share a video to capture kind of the breadth and a little bit of the depth of the work of Kingmakers. I bring greetings, Chris Chatmon from Oakland, California. This is a family affair, married to LaShawn. Denise Route Chapman, she's the executive director of the National Equity Project, will be, God willing, we'll celebrate 25 years, June 29th. We have 3 extraordinary sons, Amari, Khalil, and Jordan, who you'll see some in the video. And if you don't see them, they're one of the singers in the video as well. But without further ado, I'd like to share the video that will give an overview of the work that we're doing that really is ancestral work. So everything we're doing is nothing new, just bringing, paving it forward based upon what was done prior to. And so without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and show this video. And just let me know, though, if there's any technical issues. But here we go. Do folks see the screen? When you look at the history of this country, Black children, Black people, Black consciousness, the Black physical body, the Black spirit is under daily assault and daily attack. And so we posit, if we focus and are intentional and unapologetic around the needs of Black children, it actually will empower and engage all children and all families. One of the big questions that is asked within the curriculum is, how do I see myself? And schools oftentimes give an answer to Black boys. See yourself as having a Black History Month. See yourself as in the lower track classes. So for us, this is not just a job. This is a necessity. We can predict educational outcomes based on your gender, the neighborhood you live in, and the ethnicity. That is racial inequity at its finest. It's important for people that do this work to come with that same sense of urgency. I know we will have moved the bar to the next level when public schools across the country actually move beyond 10th grade ethnic studies courses or Black History Month to literally rewriting curriculum in this country. When you see a young king, understand that he's not an N-word. When you see a young king, understand his potential, where you can see how bringing out Black genius works. Now is the time really to lean into these institutions and rewrite a whole new narrative. We just wanted to be clear that this is about the love of Black boys. This is about the love of our children. This is about giving our lives as best we can to create a new world for them.
Black boy, better listen close. When your elders speaking, better have the most respect. And I'll teach you how to get it. We ain't always gotta act like opposition. No, I got the wisdom, I'ma share it with you. If my life a movie, what you in the picture? If I got some time, I can kick it with you. Chop it up, tell me what's been on your mind. Pardon my absence, we back on the grind. Get in the jump on a no far behind. Breaking down barriers one at a time. I'll give you the game, the strength in your spine. Aiming for greatness, don't settle for fine. Men on a mission, don't slip out of line. Vision is vivid like T in this prime. I got a dream, we all sit in the vine. Peace in the streets, no need for police. Mom and pops in love, check cash every money. Work piled up, resume on fleek. Got my passport stand for the land next month. Every move that I make ain't average. Come now, king, let me sign your up. Built a whole castle for you to run. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, make it happen right here. Like, hate for this fire that I bring. What I speak is in my veins, what my genes. Right, wrong, stand strong, what it seems. What you mean, what you mean. What is hate for this fire that I bring? What I speak is in my veins, what my genes. Right, wrong, stand strong, what it seems. What you mean, what you mean.
I'm over here popping my head, Chris.
Oh, right on, right on, right on.
Yes. So we're just going to go ahead and get started, if that's okay with y'all, right? We pulled together this program for the conference, really wanting to focus on the imaginary and the potential futures, what those imagined futures look like within and with regard to education, right? The conference has been expansive and thinking about multiple and different industries and, and impacts. And we want to really think about education and what are the pathways and opportunities that we can unveil in those spaces. One of the reasons why we chose and reached out to the two of you is because the works that your organizations have planned and that are engaged in have a gender-specific focus. And I wondered if we can just begin to talk from that standpoint. Tell us a little bit about why break out across gender?
Kendra, you want to go first, or would you like me?
Go ahead. You can get it started.
Right on. Where I began to get very clear around kind of gender identity and differentiating and advocating, in particular for our kings, not in absence of our queens, though, was when I came into Oakland Unified School District in 2010 to launch really the first department of its kind in the country, a department called African American Male Achievement. And the reason why at that point we were clear that we needed to focus on Black boys was really the data. At that point, Black boys on all positive academic indicators within Oakland Unified School District, Black boys were at the bottom, and at all negative academic indicators, Black boys were at the top. And through this lens of targeted universalism, meaning if you design for and focus on those furthest from opportunity and ideate and prototype and accelerate their performance, a rising tide raises all ships. And so the focus from my standpoint, really the data was the reason why. And then we learned you can't have African-American male achievement without African-American female achievement. But this idea of ideating and prototyping with the nuance of gender and ethnicity or race, in particular in the context of white supremacy and all of the isms that this society really perpetuates well, it was really important for us to get locked and loaded around our kings, our boys. We've evolved, I'll say, but I'll kind of share that in our evolution. But that's our focus really around Black boys started in 2010. And the why was really the data. If that gives you some context of where our why is. I think we've since learned just to kind of talk about our evolution, really even that is a Eurocentric frame. And in our indigenous culture, the manifestation of wellness really is the balance of masculine and feminine energy, which we are really more on that tip than kind of locking in men, kings and queens. That isn't for us to say or to fit folk in. It's really creating safe space for folks who identify as Black and cultivating male and female energy is the journey that we're on now, be it if you're identify as a man, a woman, or them or they. So I'll stop there, but that's kind of how we're approaching the work and how we came into it some 10 years ago.
Wonderful. That's a wonderful start. Kendra, how about you? Girls leadership is focused on girls leadership, but of course, and I think what Chris is saying about the evolution, that there's also this way in which girls leadership is really thinking about that advocacy and that, why it's important for boys and folks along the gender continuum to have a more expansive view of gender as well. Wanting you to speak into that, but also thinking about why it's also important to have specific conversations with and about girls.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate what you both just shared. And one of the things that we know, like a part of our theory of change, is that gender expectations negatively impact all of our young people.
That's right.
And so, but for us, like we specifically look at female identified youth because a lot of the experiences that especially girls of color have had are actually invisible. Like we need to uncover what they are. Like you probably can remember, like back in February when we saw that video go viral of the 9-year-old girl who the Rochester police pepper sprayed, right? Yeah. And they justified that, you know, and they were saying she was resisting. She's 9 years old. There was a cry for help, like her family called for mental health support. And one of the officers said, like in an accusatory tone, he's like, "You're acting like a child." And she's like, "I am a child." And so like the adultification of Black girls, the over policing, the over like surveillance. And what that leads to is like, we're not protecting girls and providing spaces where they can feel nurtured and safe. And so even though like that incident happened with the police, we know that in schools what's happening. And this is because we have like research from Monique Morris and Monique Lane. Like I can literally name like 10 people, you know, who have painted this picture of what's happening in schools. It's the same thing. Like our girls in schools their bodies are being surveilled. They're being over policed. They're being silenced and rendered invisible. And so that's what our work, you know, like we have the data around suspension rates and around like wellness outcomes and all that. But so for us, for us at Girls Leadership, our work around for specifically girls and girls of color is really because we're within this system that is not, it's not healthy.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if this is a good time too, just to talk about, I'll be really brief with it, but just want to share like our leadership, our recent report that was released.
Ready to Lead.
Ready to Lead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to mention that because it's within that context that we went out and tried to engage in this new study around, basically we were asking ourselves the question, like, what do girls of color aspire to in terms of leadership? And like, what are barriers or supports that they need to exercise leadership? And I have to say that girls' studies on leaderships have centered white middle class girls. Mm-hmm. And so those studies don't speak to like those of us who've been in positions where we have to make decisions based on data. Those studies don't speak to what Indigenous girls, girls of color need. And so we went out to conduct this research study, and we had 2,000 girls in the study from like 12 to 18 years old. And then we surveyed 600 teachers, middle school and high school teachers. And so we did that through focus groups and then like these online surveys. Mm-hmm. And what we found is that like Black and Latinx girls are ready to lead. Like they identify as leaders. They have the highest levels of like self-confidence, and they're like seeking out opportunities to practice and develop leadership. But the barriers they face are actually like in schools, they're experiencing gender and racial like bias from teachers. Their teachers are seeing them through these deficit lenses. Like you're from a single family household, or you're low income, or we think that you lack whatever. They're seen through deficits. And so like, I feel like our work ahead is like to disrupt that, is to dismantle that.
You know, it feels like a shared thread in the work. Thank you both for sort of outlaying, you know, the focus and the intention of the work. And a shared lens of the work is that centering leadership and leadership development. Ayanna Pressley, building on the work of Monique Morris and a number of other scholars, has put the In Push Out Act forward with our Congress to explore ways of ending the push out of young people who are othered, right? So we do know that anti-Blackness racism is foundational to determining who is other, who is non-white and non-white male, right? Then provides the rubric by which we decide who should be in a classroom or who is welcome in these spaces, who is a good leader. And one of the things I feel comes out of both of the work, it does definitely in the Ready to Lead report, I put the link into the chat for y'all that are interested, is that there are ways in which young people and the young people that y'all are working with and that you are writing about show their leadership that can be read as misbehavior. And I wonder how we work with them. So in the direct work with young people around how they're perceived versus how they're experiencing themselves, right? They're showing their own leadership capacity in a variety of ways. And sometimes that's seen as a reason to ask them to leave the classroom or that they didn't do something in the right way or whatnot. So, you know, it's disrupting classroom management. What are ways then that as in the work that you're doing that you construct ways for young people to disrupt those impressions of themselves, to interrupt them and to protect themselves in those spaces? They're often on their own trying to defend and to navigate that. What are some ideas that come out of the work that you do to support them in that?
Yeah, so our approach, so we work with school districts really to dismantle white supremacy and structural racism, acknowledging there is no single driver for dismantling that institution, that it requires cross-functional, intergenerational, legacy type planning. One aspect is definitely youth voice and leadership, full stop. And in systems of oppression, public schools, we tokenize youth voice. We typically don't access their genius until really on the back end of when a decision's already been made. So our goal in working with school districts across the country, one is elevating youth voice, because as Sister Kendra said, we have normalized failure and the problem of practice versus a narrative of promise and celebrating our genius, our cultural legacy and prosperity. So these systems that outlive all of us, white supremacy is fully baked from the system, the structure, the condition, and culture. And one aspect to deal with that toxic system is elevating youth voice and a narrative of hope, of prosperity that youth are driving. That's necessary yet insufficient. We also have to rewrite curriculum. The other reason why our kings and queens bury their crown and don't know who they are and whose they are is because they are embedded in Eurocentric content and curriculum and quality standards from preschool through 12th grade. And so many times, and I appreciated again the brilliance of my sister Kendra talking about, we as adults have to unlearn what the school system has fully baked our understanding of who we are and whose we are, because we don't know who we are and whose we are until we take our first Black Studies class in college. And so for us, youth voice is paramount from the beginning through the design and at the decision. Changing the narrative from evolving from a problem of practice to a promise of practice. Whoever controls the narrative in the country, in the classroom, in the school, has the power. And the narrative has to be one that's Pan-African, African-centric, indigenous, API, Rasa. And the narrative right now is Eurocentric, and individualistic, capitalistic. And my other thing that I appreciated what Sister Kendra said was this concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are because I am. May the circle be unbroken. But we send our children into a system where we're competing with each other, and it privileges the privilege and it further disadvantages the disadvantage. And so we have to change the metrics of what does the system look like, sound like, where there is no where there isn't equity, or excuse me, where there's no inequity, I should say. What are those metrics? And so as we go into this system, be it change, elevating youth voice, increasing youth leadership and changing the narrative, if we don't change the metrics, as you said, Dr. Williams, then now a king or queen who is now rocking their crown, they know who they are and whose they are, becomes a threat. And now they get kicked out of class for defiance. They no longer have access to these courses because systems of oppression self-correct. And an actualized king or queen is a threat to the system, the structure, the teacher, the principal, and those leaders that have positional authority. And so in closing, the other areas that are equally important is how we access the collective genius, the curators of our culture, and the social capital within our community, because far often than not, we're seen as either adversarial, it's negative, where we have rich history and assets that can be leveraged in service of our kings and queens that can accelerate the learning, not just for our children, but for all children. And what binds all of the things that I'm saying is policy. But too often than not, we tokenize youth voice and we want to focus on policy, but culture eats policy for breakfast. And unless we change the culture, which is legacy work, then it don't matter what the system and the structure, all this other stuff becomes irrelevant, because you can have dynamic, brilliant, beautiful people in these systems, but their spirits get calcified, and the legacy of white supremacy outlives all of the individual, dynamic, extraordinary folk. But I'll stop there.
Ooh, say it again for the people in the back, Chris. Okay, because I want to. There's so many ways that our work intersects, and like our theory of change intersects. And so I just want to say, first and foremost, that I appreciate the question, and I want to give some examples. And I also want to say that our youth are okay. Like they are actually okay. They're showing up because they're learners, right? They're in process of learning. And so if we can work with the adults in their lives to make sure that the adults aren't perpetuating harm, that the adults are ready to be like culturally responsive, are ready to like identify the ways bias impacts the way that they interact with young people. If we can work on the adults who are running classrooms and systems, and we can, then our youth are going to be just fine.
That's right.
But I do want to say that there are some unique ways that, just like in terms of my practice in schools, that I have found that work to help girls self-actualize, right? And one of them is that idea that they're in process. So one thing that we know, it's tough because I'm like working in schools, even though I know that schools ultimately like are serving the purpose that they're intended to serve. Like they're not broken systems. The system is actually doing what it was designed to do.
That's right.
And so like it's hard. It's sometimes I find like conflict within myself, knowing that, and like knowing the ways that I've invested myself and my educator colleagues have invested themselves. And it's really hard to sustain yourself in a system where you can see clearly what it's doing. But not all of it. But listen, our young people are there, right? So we show up there because that's where our young people are. That's right. And so schools, and I say all of that because schools violently deplete like our young people of their joy. They deplete girls of their joy. They have to come in with armor on. Like we get this, I talked about my grandmother and mom. I know there are other people out there who have like ancestral legacies. We come in with this wisdom and knowledge, and like my family believes in education. So I'm coming in like grounded and centered and like ready to do what I have to do to survive this system. Right. But what we need, because that's not sustainable for our girls either. And so what we need are like classrooms, and if you're not in school, community-based programs that really allow girls to be in process.
That's right.
Like they don't need to have figured it out. Like they need adults to say, how was your day? Like, I care about you. Can you, I come into my space and I'm gonna let you be who you are. And so and I just wanted to say, the thought just escaped me, but it's gonna come back. I'll tell you.
Take your time.
Okay. So let's just think about like the formal spaces. So we need like those formal spaces where girls can go, and like have a buffer from what I was just talking about, and have the space to like critique these social toxins that they experience, a space where they can talk about racism and talk about sexism and their experience, and have this experience of the collective that actually is quite healing.
That's right.
And they also need these informal spaces, right? Can you just open your door if you're an administrator, or can you just open your office door for them to just drop in and vent? And so, those are, when you just asked the question, Wendi, my mind went straight to like what are the spaces that girls need to be able to do that, to be in process, and to be able to like self-actualize.
Amen. I just want to I say that one in the spirit of my work within Oakland Unified School District. Again, Kendra hit it right on the head. There was several reports. Monique was one of the folks that we worked with to launch our African American Female Excellence Department when I was the Deputy Chief of Equity. But our queens were sharing they need safe space. The adults had tuned out. And this is for decades. They had normalized the assault on our girls' spirit, mind, and body, where girls would tell them things that were happening. Oh, girl, take care of it. Oh, boys being all this stuff that when we actually looked at the data longitudinally, it was like enough is enough. And so, yeah, we have to create safe space in the classroom, in the hallway, in the administrative office, on the block, around. I mean, so I just want to lean in, Ashe, and just double click on that one. And I'd say, and that's true for our kings too. I mean, we need a safe space to heal, to talk, to not have the bravado and actually just exhale and love up on each other for all the right ways, cry, heal. And so, but there's not enough safe space, in particular the school domain. And so I appreciated what you said on so many different levels. And the data showed that too, within Oakland Unified School District. So just want to acknowledge.
There's so many, when each of you speak, it's really powerful. And I'm watching the comments in the chat that folks are really, energized by you. Kendra, when you say our youth are okay, I really want to lift up that affirmation, because I think that the narrative can be that, oh, we got to go and save our girls, we got to go and save our boys. Save them from whom, and whom that we're saving them from? That's where the problem is located. And so when we talk about the adults and the systems and the structures that are seeing them in these ways and behaving toward them in these ways, that is where the dysfunction is.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I think about this because even our questions, as you all were talking, I was thinking about even the ways that we framed this conversation today. This notion, we took the notion of unfinished from Amanda Gorman's beautiful poem during the inauguration, a nation that's unfinished, like process, and, just in development and growing and doing its work. There's a beautiful piece to that, but I think there's also perhaps ways in which we might talk about the fact that they are in a very normative developmental arc, and it's our problem, our being systems and structures. And I'm going to own the parts and ways in which we play in them, even when we're trying to push up against and disrupt them too, because I think there is a both and there. I think that there is something happening for us as the adults, as the educators, to really make room and have space for that. And that's what I hear the two of you saying, that it's as much of preparing and working with young people to sort of protect their hearts as it is to actually work within the context of systems and structures that are failing to see them as children, or failing them to see them as just in their normative developmental arc.
Absolutely. One of the findings from the study, those 600 teachers that I talked about, we surveyed, less than half of them had been in training specifically with like a gender or racial equity lens, or like leadership development. And so just thinking about and thinking about the educators that I've interacted with, you come into the profession because you have the desire to help. It's the helping profession. You have the desire to be a positive impact, in the lives of young people. And so this is not to excuse or dismiss or take away or shift the focus, because it really is the educator's responsibility, right, to do their own work. But it is to say that we need resources. We need school leaders. We need those who have access to resources to really invest in anti-racist and anti-bias education training. And there's so many organizations, Oakland is so full of organizations who do this work, that it's not about not being able to find it. It really is about making the commitment to invest.
So what do you make of the fact that there are so many organizations that are holding culture, holding practice, holding health, holding well-being for young people, and Chris mentioned before, across the spectrum. I know that the organizations that you're working for, are looking at Black and Latinx girls, looking at Black boys, but we're also looking at the API community, the Indigenous folks across the community as well. There are lots of organizations. What do you make of what is needed then to push this agenda forward?
Yeah, so for me, the Calvary ain't coming to save nobody. I think we are on sacred land, but acknowledging the Ohlone, the Pomo, the Miwok, all of our indigenous brothers and sisters. I think the challenge, and this is part of white supremacy, what we've been born into, is is, or how do we organize in a way? There was there, at one point in my own understanding of our evolution of the civil rights era, where there wasn't this tension of the Panthers were doing the Panthers thing, but it didn't stop our Brown brothers doing what they're doing, and our API brothers, and we called each other like compadres, like we stood united. Where somewhere along the line, and this played itself out even in the district, where my advocacy for my people then became a threat for others, and it was because of resource. And that to me was that's the remnants of white supremacy, who've made their legacy off of their financial capital based off our backs. So I just say that for me, it's a more of how do we organize differently and see humanity in each other, knowing we may have different stories, but we're still people. And so that's, I think for me, how do we, in this time of healing, of transition and transformation, how do we draw out that through line? Because upsetting the setup is when Black, Brown, Indigenous, API get back to standing united.
Yes.
We will accelerate everything, and the resource will be resource, and others will be following our lead. And so I do think under the multiple pandemics, we actually have an opportunity. And the media, though, again, plays and pits us. But no, we are compadres. We stand united. Know your culture, know your history. And Oakland, what I believe better than, well, I don't want to, but I just think what we're doing, there's so much of it here, too, that then it becomes a challenge in the sense of we need resources. But I think that's why we have to pay attention to our ancestors and knowing that really that we don't own anything, that, you know, it is in our ancestral right to work in service of something that's that's greater than all of us. And how do we pave this forward? And so I just have the hope and faith that we are doing that. There's brothers and there's the diverse folk that I know in the town. There's more of us that stand united than against each other. So I actually feel the current changing. But telling that story, I don't hear that story. I don't hear enough of how we're working in collaboration. What I hear is the division or all these other things. And that's where corporate media and television continues to tell our vision. And we got to stop that too. We got to tell a different story. So, I mean, that's my response to kind of what you were sharing.
That's very powerful. You know, it makes me think of, I'm actually currently right in the middle of Heather McGhee's book, and Heather McGhee did our keynote early this afternoon. Her book is called The Sum of Us, and really just looking at the ways in which when we don't align in our multiracial, multicultural, multilingual coalition, we actually work against each other. And also the main thrust and thesis of that piece is that for white people, particularly poor white people, that in fact, we're their people as opposed to elite whites in those spaces, because it's about keeping many of us having the burden of the work on many of our backs.
That's right.
Kendra, what would you add to this conversation, or where is your mind? I know we started one place and we can also end up in other places. So just where is that now?
I'm thinking of two things in particular. One is we're working on this curriculum with our young people where where we're looking at, so the Black Women Radicals and the Asian American Feminist Coalition came together to have a conversation after the rise in Asian hate and violence. And so we're specifically looking at work that they, like this collective work that they produce, which really we have been working together longer than we've been divided. Right. And so we're trying, so my mind just went to that work with young people, because we've got to remind them, we've got to instill it in them as they're working towards social justice, social change, and becoming activists and wanting to engage in that way. Like the center of that work that we do with them, and it has to be around solidarity, solidarity movements. That's one piece that I was thinking of. And then the other thing, we're really trying to lean into the partnership model, because so for just like for context, in terms of girls, like across the country, there are only 12% of girls that are being impacted by girls only programming, like by girls' schools or by. So we have a lot of. So instead of us seeing one another as competitors, we have a lot more girls that we can tap in that need programming, that need the opportunity to work with us. And so I feel like we've had this organizational shift over the last couple months where our strategy now, well, it has been, but our strategy, we're specifically looking at ways to just partner with schools and let that be our work. So going into a school community and recognizing like the local wisdom and knowledge, and just seeing how we can enhance the work that's happening. And it's very much what you were just saying, Chris, in terms of like targeted universalism at the beginning. We liberatory design, it's very same thing. But we're using that process in order to co-design curriculum with girls, with the young people at the schools. And we're trying to disrupt gender norms. We're trying to disrupt like ways that like inequities that they experience and that they name are happening on their campus. And like the doors are open, like educators, their school leaders are opening the doors so that we can come in and make these partnerships. And they're being funded either if the schools don't have it, we're going to fundraise. Like we're going to raise the money to make this happen. But we're committed to partnering to more of that like solidarity. We don't see it as like we can't tackle issues on our own as an organization. We actually need to partner.
Yeah, the pickoff point is when we move in isolation, and it goes back again to our cultural value. Our strength is in our support. So how do we do this work collectively? Just a couple of little sprinkles I just wanted to add. One thing that we teach our kings, you at the table or you're on the menu. Any decision that impacts your life, our king should be at the decision-making table, both in the design as well as when it's in the vote. Anytime that someone's assessing you, our kings need to be assessing them. In systems of oppression, they have it all wrong. The adults are always the ones that are in control, again, playing this perpetuation of positional authority and not seeing the genius and beauty in our children. And so we just try to, we're working on the adults, which is the heaviest lift, because our kings and queens get it. Actually, the younger they are, the easier the uptake of this information of how to ask questions, that you want to be at the decision-making table, and how to advocate. Adults have to spend a lot of time just unlearning all of this stuff because it gets codified. Then when you go to school and get your credential, it gets codified. Then you get your administrative credential. Then you go to your you just get further baked in white supremacy. And so you really need a whole different, like what Michelle Alexander did when she jumped, fighting for, the school to prison pipeline. She had to lead that whole field and get a level of understanding through a whole nother ecology. And I think public school systems now have to look at different ecosystems because the answers are not in that research. The answers are not in that process. It's just perpetuating. So again, we're trying to empower our young people though at every level while we are slower to change. But our young folk get it. And so it's just a matter of helping them in those positions and then letting them do what they do.
It's so, you said our young folks get it. And Kendra said, the youth are fine. It's us. And I just think about that idea of like, we actually put them through the violence of our schooling systems to make them unlearn their voice, make them hide their crown, unlearn the fact that they are deserving of that space. I just want, this is such a powerful conversation. There are two questions that have come up, so I just want to pose them to you both and just kind of put them out there and see where we land with them. I feel like this first one that was posed a bit ago, we kind of got to through some of the stories that you've shared, but Susan Chasen asked, can you speak to or about why it's so important for both of you to do gender-specific work and programming? And I guess what I would like to ask in addition to that, because I feel like you've answered some of that in some ways, but how also do you do work that is non-binary? Like, how do you hold that space for our youth who are in the process of their development and articulating their development and their identity they are becoming? How do you create that space for all of the ways in which they are becoming?
Yeah.
Beautiful question. Go for it.
Yeah, I wanted to just say, like, it's a false binary, right? The power of like sexism and misogyny is this binary. And so, you know, our programming, like I said earlier, directly confronts like gender expectations and norms. And I want to say that young people are further ahead than many of the adults that are teaching and running our program. So like when you really, it's really, I hate to just keep saying the same thing, but
it's true, Kendra.
But it's true, like it's our mindsets. Like we have to challenge the binary, right? Like we have to be aware of the ways that our language and our actions and programming promote the binary and like really exclude and invisible and render invisible and harm gender nonconforming youth. And so like like this whole idea of listening, Chris already has said it, and it's like that first step of liberatory design, which is one of the processes that we use when we're co-designing with young people. But the first step that we have to do is listen. Like we have to say, like I can tell you that I think our programming meets the needs of girls and gender expansive youth, but we always have to be asking that question and be aware.
That's right.
Like, are we continuing to meet the needs? Like, did we add some element that doesn't? Are we posing like our check-in questions in a way that not everyone can access because it does promote a binary or so and also I just want to say that we're getting ready to kick off. I think I mentioned this already now that I think about it, but we're getting ready to kick off this work with a high school this summer where young people have said we actually want to disrupt gender norms on our campus. I think I mentioned that already. But I just want to say that we really have to listen to young people, not burden them with like teaching us, but listen to them. And when they say what they need, we got to go and make sure we're equipped to provide that.
Ashe, I mean, just a double click, highlight, italicize, underline, bold letters. Everything Kendra just said, I'm with you, Queen. Who am I as a 53-year-old Black man growing up in my era? The experts for me in this domain, and it's been we have a street team of young kids, queens, and gender neutral youth that has really allowed us to remain relevant. And so it's not for us to say, it is really for us to listen. I think where we coach up is around our values of love, of African-centeredness, of nothing about us without us, of our strength is in our support. How our young people want to be identified is that's for us to listen, to know how to support them on their journey. And so I'll just say, I'm continuing to evolve and grow in particular this domain, because in the spirit of my own evolution, I'm really a student. And so the experts have been the young people that are driving our whole organization now. And we have a space. And so we did 40 consecutive weeks of a Breaking Bread, a live podcast for our youth. And it was our Black youth that said, hey, you know what? Well, Breaking Bread is validating our kings. Well, what about our queens and our gender neutral? So they created Crossroads, the intersectionality of Blackness. So we just like, hey, let's do it. And just, again, we are beautiful, dynamic in however we show ourselves. And so it's not for us to fit folks into a categorize. No. We're just trying to give more platform and support our evolution of young people for knowing who they are, whose they are, and moving with integrity. And on that, they are informing us on how we evolve in this space. So I'll just say kind of where we're at organizationally regarding kind of gender neutral, non-binary, that really, it is our use 14 to 25 that influence how this organization will remain relevant for our young people that identify within the African diaspora.
Now, what advice would, one question here is about starting programs, creating programs in communities across this country. If there's not a Kingmakers there, if there's not a girls leadership, charter or, programming happening in their communities, what would you advise?
There's somebody doing something. I think get to know who are the curators of culture in your house, on your block, in your neighborhood, in your town, in your precinct, in your city, in your vicinity, so I think it goes back to story, like listening. We all had that uncle, or we had that someone down the street, or like how do we begin to elevate those folks versus in institutions, we want to, oh, you need a degree or no. There's amazing stuff happening all over. And we got to get out of our own way to actually curate and cultivate and celebrate that goodness, that culture. And for me, Kingmakers, we're a process. We don't fly. We're not going anywhere to do the work. We facilitate processes, but we tell people, you have all that you need. The Calvary is not coming to save anybody. We must look to each other and help each other organize in a way that's in service of our children, because we're planting seeds that will grow to be trees that will provide shade for children we haven't even envisioned yet. That's right. And there's fertile soil all over. So that's my few cents.
Okay.
Can I just add that don't recreate the wheel if you don't have to. Like, there are people doing the work, and I think for the person that asked the question, I noticed that they're from South Carolina, and so I just want to say there's this new partner but it's in North Carolina, but it's closer than California, right? So like the Charlotte Lab School, I recommend looking at the work that they're doing and going to visit. And I just want to emphasize this point that there are people doing the work, and we don't have to start from scratch. And I just want to speak from that perspective as an educator, as a school leader. It felt like we didn't have enough resources in terms of like time and the space in the day to create new programming. So one of the things that I leaned into definitely towards the latter end of my tenure as an administrator, was leaning into like community organizations that are doing the work, and then bringing them in to run programs. Because their goal is to impact young people. We have young people. So if there's a way that we can, work and collaborate together. So we didn't have to do it because our educators were tapped out. Like they didn't have any more space. They would have done it if they could, but they didn't have any more space to.
Wonderful. So we are coming to a close, but I wonder if we can pose a question to you, the two of you. And that question is, what are the questions that are swirling in your head right now? Like, what is driving you? What are you wondering about? What are you curious about? In what directions are you going? What are the questions that are driving you right now, that are influencing you right now? What are you thinking about?
Well, for me, real time, I healing. I just want to. I would lean in lovingly that actually I don't think our children and our folk are as good as we've been through so much trauma, and so our street team has enlisted 2 national conversations with Black youth all over the country, and in schools we were tracking COVID, and our children were saying we're gonna get killed by the police quicker than we're gonna die from COVID. Right. So I just say this idea of healing, what's on my mind and my heart, that there is at no point in this time that there's been a spike on suicide within our community. Historically, we may have had self-destructive behavior, but yet in terms of suicide, it wasn't as rampant as it is right now. It's some of the highest rates just in this country, and I just feel that we're not listening. We are not engaging and encouraging and empowering Black children, Black people, men and women, and gender neutral. So the question I have is, man, how do we lead with love, and how are we reaching out to folks that we don't reach out to? How are we thinking about people we need to apologize? How are we, as opposed to crossing the street of a group of Black teens, how are we actually meeting them Black teens and just loving up on them and talking to them? So my question is just like, we need healing. We need each other. So that's the question I'm struggling with right now, because of what I'm tracking is there's a lot of folk that are hurting and that's intergenerational.
That is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm swirling with a whole lot of questions right now. We partner with schools and teachers, and we're asking them, what do you need? What do you need for this summer? Like, how can we support you? How can we support your wellness and sustain you? And I'm very, and the responses we're getting is like, I don't know. Like people are really depleted right now. And so I'm like, so how do we support educator? You know, what do we create this summer? We're starting to dream about it, but what do we create that for people to like just tap back into like their reserves and be ready? Because this next school year, y'all, it's about to be a trip. It's gonna be a lot holding, a lot of holding for young people, and I feel like also I'm starting to think about administrators too, because I was an administrator. We didn't get trained, okay, on how to hold space for the other adults in our community. And so I'm also thinking about like, what can we do? Because like I left the profession, just straight up, just full transparency. I left because my family, like I couldn't sustain all of that. And so how can we make sure that people are staying in the field? Like, what can we do to support them so that they can stay and be nourished and be able to take care of communities and have fresh vision, right? And try new things so that young people can thrive.
That's actually been a big piece of the work that we've been doing here through the School of Education when the pandemic hit, was to hold space for teachers and leaders, because their hearts are like very broken. And it's really hard to imagine how they're going to hold space for all that's coming back into the classroom. So I agree with both you and Chris, Kendra, around, you know, how much children are hurting, but we also have to have adults in their presence who can receive them.
That's right.
We're going to end on some joy though, because, you know, that's important too. And that's how we take care of our hearts. And so Alfredo Gonzalez asked the two of you, what are your favorite artists? Who keeps you motivated? And we'll end on that note. Yeah, fun.
Go for it, Queen, and I'll follow you.
Okay. There's an artist in residence at the African American Policy Forum, Abby Dobson. Abby, talented. Okay, you've got to look up Abby Dobson.
Okay.
And then for me, it's also Guapale.
I say, I'd have to say, so, Kingmakers, we've done put out 3 albums. So I would say the Kings and Queens on our Revolution Remix album. We have a film we're about to drop that is an extraordinary expression of art and the movement. Fabiana Rodriguez, Demont Pender, Picasso out of DC, Color Queen Kava, who's our art director at Oakland School of the Arts. But I'm going to shout out Amari Malik Chapman, Khalil Elijah Chapman, and Jordan Latif Chapman. All 3 of my sons are, if they're not rapping, they're busting a poem. So those are the artists that have been real in my life of late.
Awesome. We just, we've had such an active, I think we could go on for much longer, but it is time to end. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation. We were talking about racial and gender socialization and ending the school to prison pipeline. But to be quite honest, I feel like we touched on something much more deeper and essential. And so I thank both Chris Chatmon of the Kingmakers and Kendra Carr of Grow's Leadership for joining this Mills College, the Center for Transformative Action, and this amazing space that we've had held for us over the next few days. Thank you so much. Be well.
I'll say.
Thank you all.
Thank you.